Welcome back, it's Emma here with AQUA Real Estate. Let's finish the third and final video of the series. Inspection Addendum. Our first topic covers the response timeline if the buyer requests any repairs to be made. Then we will discuss the seller repair process if the seller elects to do repairs for the buyer. The last part of our video will cover the final 3 clauses on the addendum: oil tanks, on-site sewage systems, and neighborhood review. Let's recap the inspection process. The seller and buyer negotiate the terms of inspection in the initial offer. The buyer will then conduct a home inspection. During the inspection window, the buyer can request repairs and/or credits to the seller by using the inspection response form, Form 35R. What we did not discuss in the last video is the amount of time the buyer and seller have to respond to each other when they are negotiating the inspection. Clause 6 of the inspection addendum defines exactly how much time each party has to respond to each other. So let's take a look. As you can see, the clause is rather lengthy, so let's break down each paragraph one by one. In the first paragraph, if the buyer requests to have repairs completed, or requests that the seller issue a credit for repairs, then the buyer and seller must follow the process in the paragraphs below. The default time for the seller to give back a response to the buyer is 3 days. However, this time may be adjusted when you are negotiating your offer. Once the buyer agent has submitted the inspection response form to the listing agent, the clock begins for the sellers to give back a response to the buyer. If the default time is used, the seller has 3 days to write a response back to the buyer on the inspection response form, Form 35R. If the sellers are not in the mood to do all the repairs and credits the buyer has requested, then they will respond back to the buyers on Form 35R with an answer on what they agree to do. Once the buyer's agent has received the written response from the sellers, the buyer is on the clock. The default time is once again 3 days for the buyers to respond. So what are the consequences if the buyer or seller miss the response deadline? For the seller, not much. It just becomes the buyer's turn. It's basically the same as saying no, with an unnecessary amount of time being wasted. However, if the buyer misses the deadline, the consequences are pretty dire. The contingency is waived. The buyer cannot use the inspection contingency as a reason to withdraw from the contract without penalty of forfeiting the earnest money. The seller is not obligated to do any of the repairs or credits either. The inspection response process is a turn-based system. Each party gets their turn. Once these timelines are mutually agreed upon, neither the buyer nor the seller can force one party to make a decision quicker. Most buyers' agents will use the default dates when they write their offer, but if you are the listing agent and have a concern about the buyers procrastinating, you may want to shorten the response timeline. The last paragraph of the clause is vital to understand. Even experienced agents don't always grasp the meaning and unintentionally miss the deadline. The inspection response process is not an endless cycle of buyer and sellers responding back and forth until they agree. Once the seller has responded, the buyer reply time in paragraph B is all the time the buyer has. The buyer and seller can continue to negotiate, but if no deal is made, the buyer must either agree with the seller's best offer or terminate the deal before the deadline. Missing the deadline will waive the contingency. Our second topic is the seller repair process. The repairs clause covers the process of how repairs should be managed. If the seller agrees to do repairs that the buyer requested, then the seller is obligated to complete all the repairs at the seller's expense. The repairs clause specifies when exactly the repairs should be completed by. The default time is 3 days prior to the closing date. The inspection addendum does not give instructions on who shall do the repairs. The repairs can be done by anyone the seller chooses, including the seller themselves. For some repairs, that may be fine, but for the big stuff, that may not be in your buyer's interest. If you represent the buyer, it is wise to have it in writing that the repairs be completed by a licensed and bonded contractor. For the larger ticket items, it is recommended to spell out which contractor you want the seller to use and attach the contractor bid. Otherwise, the seller has total control on whom they choose, and most sellers will opt for the least expensive option. If the sellers choose the contractor, put in writing that the seller include receipts and invoices for all the work completed. This way, your buyer has a reference of which contractors did the work should a problem come up down the road. The buyer has the right to revisit the property and hire the inspector again to inspect the seller's repairs. This inspection is limited to only the items being repaired and must be the same inspector that recommended the repairs. Our final topic to complete the series is the oil tank, on-site sewage system advisory, and neighborhood review clauses. Should the property have an oil storage tank, the buyer has the right to inspect the presence or non-presence of one. If one is present, the buyer and seller can negotiate on whether to have it decommissioned by a professional. If the property has a septic system, an inspection is highly recommended to be done before purchase. In fact, it may even be required by the local government and certainly by the buyer's lender. The inspection of a septic system is outside the scope of a general inspector. Include a septic addendum with the purchase and sale agreement on any home that has a septic system. The neighborhood review contingency is very rarely ever used by agents. If checked, it gives the buyer the right to investigate schools, traffic patterns, bus routes, noise, parking, etc., etc., etc. Pretty much anything and everything that a buyer would care about in regards to a neighborhood. While buyers should be made aware there is an option to do a neighborhood review contingency. We find that adding additional contingencies such as this one usually only alarms the seller and listing agent that the buyer is just not sure on the property and is looking to have extra ways out of the agreement. Should your buyer wish to use the neighborhood contingency and then decide that it's not the right neighborhood for them, the buyer agent should use Form 90M to terminate the deal. That's all for our training on inspections. I hope you enjoyed the series.
Be sure to check out our other great training videos inside AQUA University. Hey there, are you watching our training videos but not yet an AQUA agent? We would love to have you. Our 100% commission model, world-class training systems, technology, and marketing make AQUA the coolest and fastest growing brokerage in the Northwest. Go to our website, getaqua.com/careers to learn more. Join the club.